Chapter 8 Johnny Appleseed. The last day of the apple activities finally arrived. Mrs. Mitchell had promised the class a big surprise at the end of the week. Each group had to stand up in front of the class and give a report on what they did and what they learned. Annabelle and the other students hoped that wasn't the only surprise the teacher had for them. What did Mrs. Mitchell have up her sleeve? They would have to wait a bit to find out. The first part of the morning began with the apple presentations from each group. Of course, Annabelle wore her silk apple scarf and apple barrettes, which were the finishing touches to her whole outfit. Many of the students wore something with their favorite apple color on it, or something with some kind of apple theme. Caitlin's mom had brought her a pair of apple earrings, and David had on a green shirt. But the surprise of the day was Sally. She wore a red apple shirt. Sally was really getting into the apple spirit day. She even looked friendly enough to talk with. Her usual frown was replaced with a kind smile. It seemed that the good apple fairy had waved her magic wand over Sally. Annabelle walked over to pay her a compliment. Sally, that's an awesome apple shirt you have on. I know our group is going to do a great job on our presentation, Annabelle said. I think you're right about that, Sally responded with a smile. Sally actually had a positive attitude today. David was pretty excited as well. Annabelle volunteered their group to go first. Just as Annabelle expected, their group did great. David talked about the seasons of an apple tree and displayed his chart, and Sally discussed her apple diagram. And of course, Annabelle concluded their presentation by sharing the results of her class apple graph and shared her poem, which went like this. Apples. First, you plant an apple seed, then you give it what it needs water, air, and heat from the sun. Then apple buds bloom one by one. Pollination must happen for the tree to bear fruit. So many glorious blossoms, they really look so cute. So they're visited by bees who do their job well. They move into orchards and there they dwell until it's time to leave. Then flower petals fall as apples begin to grow. They bring joy to us all, red, yellow, green, and mixtures too. I really love apples. How about you? Everyone clapped for the group when they had finished. Writing poetry was a gift Annabelle really enjoyed sharing with others. After all the groups gave their presentations, Mrs. Mitchell made a quick call on the school telephone in their room. Then she addressed the class. Well, you all did a magnificent job on your Apple activities. I'm so proud of each and every one of you. I see this self discovery activity really made the Apple unit come alive. You have all learned a lot of valuable things that I know you won't forget. Before Mrs. Mitchell could say anything else, Caitlin decided to interrupt her with a question. So, Mrs. Mitchell, what is the special apple surprise you promised us? Caitlin asked. A lot of the other class members began to chime in and ask about the big surprise. Mrs. Mitchell calmed the class down and continued with her speech. There is a very special visitor who'll be knocking on our door in just a few moments. This person really loves apples too. Long ago, he used to travel from place to place planting apple seeds wherever he went. He planted lots and lots of apple trees in many different parts of the world. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? Mrs. Mitchell asked. The class started to talk with each other to see if anyone could figure out who Mrs. Mitchell was talking about. Barry decided he would give the answer a shot. Oh, I know. It was the apple genie who lived in a bottle, Barry said and then laughed. Many of the students laughed too. Mrs. Mitchell gave Barry a raised eyebrow that let him know that she didn't approve of his silly response. Just then, there was a knock on their classroom door. Mrs. Mitchell opened the door, and to their amazement, in walked none other than Johnny Appleseed. Of course, the class noticed right away that it was Mr. Jefferson, the principal of the school. He was dressed in blue jeans, a white button down shirt, and he had a metal pot on his head as a cap. He was carrying a large sack of Red Delicious, Granny Smith, and golden delicious apples for the entire class. Now, this is the best surprise ever, Annabelle said. Mr. Jefferson stayed for a short while and told the class the real story of Johnny Appleseed. The class hung on to his every word. They asked him all sorts of questions and had a detailed discussion of his life and adventures. When it was time for him to leave, the class clapped their hands and thanked him for bringing all the apples. So, Mrs. Mitchell, what are we going to do with all of these apples? David asked. Well, I guess we could cut a few of each kind and have a taste test, she said. Oh my goodness, that's the second best surprise ever, Annabelle said. As Mrs. Mitchell prepared the apples for the taste test, the class sang their apple songs and recited apple poems. Everyone tasted the three types of apples to see which kind was the class favorite, as Annabelle had done previously. Mrs. Mitchell graphed the responses. Red Delicious won hands down. This was turning out to be such an awesome apple surprise. Everyone wondered what Mrs. Mitchell had planned for the afternoon. Chapter 8 is finished. I have a question for you. What was the big surprise in this chapter, and what treat came along with it? Discuss this with your friends.